Hi, hello everyone, welcome to the July reading wrap up. It is my first sit down video that I filmed in the new flat, so you'll have to excuse the slight chaos that's going on in the background. I'm sat on the floor, I'm still kind of trying to find my best filming spot, but I don't have much going on aesthetics wise at the moment, in case that's not immediately obvious. I could be sat on a chair or on a sofa, but I feel like I do my best reviewing sat on the floor. How is everyone doing? I apologise that this video is coming like slightly later in the month, but the filming schedule has been slightly out of the window. If you're new here, welcome. My name's Charlotte. I do some bookish content amongst some other types of reading content, and as well as some like lifestyle stuff, and I review all of the books I'm reading each month. Despite all of the moving plans that happened in July, I have got a moving series on my page if you want to go watch it. I still managed to read 7 books, which I was really proud of myself for doing, because I'd kind of written off any kind of substantial progress being made with reading, especially as so much of my stuff is in boxes. So with that being said, I did actually read quite a lot of library books and physical books this month, but I haven't been able to unpack any of my books yet because my bookshelves are not secured to the wall. So I will be letting you know what was digital, what was physical, what was an audiobook as usual, but I will just be putting the covers on screen instead of having them to hold. Without further ado, let's get started. For a little context, I know all the regular viewers are sick of me saying this, but if you're new, I don't have a reading target this year. It's the first year since I started getting back into reading seriously. I've decided not to target myself, and I also have decided not to buy any books this year, buy any new books or secondhand. Actually, I'm only doing kind of library, Kindle, digital, borrow box, that kind of thing. So the first book I listened to this month, this was an audiobook. This was Matrix by Lauren Groff. This is a historical fiction that is based on a true story actually, but let me do a quick synopsis first and then we'll get into the review and everything else I thought about it. So our protagonist Marie is 17 when she's expelled from the royal court and is sent to be a prioress of a very impoverished abbey in England. Her new life is strange and unusual, but this follows her journey as she slowly gains a love for her new life, a love and devotion for her sisters, and a love for her divine visions. So this was actually a really random last minute pick for me. It was on BorrowBox, which is like a library audio listening app. And if I'm honest, it's because I needed something to listen to while I was on the stairs at the gym. I do 30 minutes on the stairs once a week and I like to audiobook. I cannot do music. I need like to focus on something. Unexpectedly, I loved it. I'm not usually a fan of like historical fiction. It's not something I reach for, least of all anything that's about like a 12th century nun. Adjo Ando narrates this and I felt like it was the perfect choice. So I kind of recognised her voice, especially recently having watched Bridgerton. And for the whole 30 minutes, I put my phone down. I was like, I think it's her, but I needed to check, and I checked and it was. For me, this book was very, very immersive. It's gorgeously written. There's a lot of like meandering, twisty-turny sentence structure that kind of goes off on tangents and in all sorts of directions, which I feel like is perfectly kind of enhanced by the narrator. Disgustingly descriptive, divine visions from the Mother Mary, complex and devoted sisterly relationships, secret trysts of a very sapphic nature. Like for me, what's not to love? I really love religious, I was gonna say religious imagery, but this book is a religious book, so I really love that kind of book. As someone that has quite like a complicated relationship with religion, like having been raised religious, I find a lot of comfort in a lot of like religious imagery and a lot of religious settings. Like it brings like a sense of calmness. It's a very vibrant read, I will say. Marie really reminds me of Brienne of Tarth from Game of Thrones, in that she's constantly described as a giantess with peculiar looks and that she's descended from a line of warrior women. She's this big, tall, imposing, like very charismatic presence throughout the abbey. I did some research into this book, but quite a while ago, so I can't remember at the time of filming this, but this is loosely based on a real person, although having seen from a lot of other reviews, a lot of people say the name is kind of where it ends. It's not a very accurate depiction of the real Marie. So I'm not sure how loose that is, but you can do your own research into that. If you're looking for like historical accuracy, which is not what I went into reading, you might be a little bit disappointed. But I think the ending of this book was a bit meh for me. But at the same time, like, how does a book like this really end? It spans such a long period of time, like her whole life essentially. But I do think it could have been about 100 pages shorter. I think for me, why I liked this book so much is that a really great read for me has always been a book that I am so enveloped in and so immersed in. I'm such like a strong visual person that if a book is so descriptive, I feel completely like sucked in and I can see everything so clearly that it's like a really good book for me, and that's what this was. So some authors will just have a really distinct way of writing that I can't quite put my finger on, that it just like clicks in my brain and all of a sudden I'm like there. And when that happens, I'm like automatically really happy with the read or the listen. And I definitely think this is maybe not a book that I would have picked up, but I'm really glad I decided to listen to it. It does have very mixed reviews online, and I can see why that's the case, and I can imagine that for a lot of you this won't be a book for you, and I can see people's very valid criticisms with it. But as someone that is kind of, I guess, like a entry-level historical fiction girly, yeah, it really hit the spot. I really enjoyed it. My next read was a digital book, and it was These Hollow Vows by Lexi Ryan. I read this on Kindle. This is a fantasy romance, and it is a duology, I believe. I'm not sure if it's a complete duology, but it is These Hollow Vows book 1. Bree has grown up hating the Fae, refusing to accept them, refusing to follow their ways, refusing to deal with the fact that they are a part of life. She refuses to accept them in their entirety. She hates them. You can probably see where this is going. When her sister is sold to the sadistic king of the Unseelie court as part of a life debt, she will do whatever she can to get her poor sweet dear sis back, which includes striking a bargain with the Unseelie king. The bargain involves stealing magical artifacts from the Seelie court to give to him. I do feel like everyone knows you shouldn't make deals with the Fae, but we'll get to that. So I read this after a TikTok recommendation, and I know I said it every video for the last year that I would not take any more TikTok recommendations, but it's too late. I've read it now. You can't stop me. I should have really known what to expect when I saw it described as a cross between ACOTAR and The Cruel Prince. Storyline wise, it was very typical, you know, this classic like love triangle between like a Labrador prince and a black cat prince, blonde versus dark hair, Seelie versus Unseelie, you know, this classic like deal with the evil king kind of thing, like very stubborn girl trying to help her sister. I just honestly think this book was like very meh. I didn't actually feel that invested with the characters. I found Bree to be very, very annoying. She had a little bit of this I'm not like other girls energy. I know a lot of fantasy female protagonists do, but this was in a way that I personally found like quite unforgiving. I feel like she repeatedly makes bad decisions without learning or taking accountability for them. And controversially, I think that Sebastian is a much better man than Finn. So Sebastian is like the golden prince and Finn is the dark, twisted, kind of like dark haired one. You know, there's always this light versus dark, good versus evil, and it's never that black and white. But when are we just gonna get two love interests that maybe have the same hair color? This book, I will say, was quite twisty, and unfortunately one thing about me as a reader is like when I'm reading, I don't read very critically, and I get so lost and immersed in books regardless of how good they are that I often don't see the twists coming. They just like come around the corner because I'm not thinking about everything that's led up to it. I don't see a lot of the foreshadowing. I don't see a lot of like the obvious markers that a twist is coming up. For me, the twists were like a pleasant enough surprise, and I do felt like they deviated a little bit from the usual twists. Like, I understand the ACOTAR comparison, but it was the smaller details rather than like the overarching plot. I guess it was the overarching plot as well. So like, although this is a Throne of Glass detail, you know, Whitebriar was the name of one of the houses versus Whitethorn, which is obviously a bit Throne of Glassy. 3 artifacts in this book versus 3 trials, 7 courts, 7 magicians in this book versus 7 high lords. There's a big old scene with fairy wine and dancing. And I know like when you're doing fantasy books with Fae, there's going to be some crossovers because a lot of them are based in like genuine mythology, but it was just a bit like, okay. The only really similarity I could pull from The Cruel Prince was that she is sent to spy on the Seelie court, which obviously Jude does in The Cruel Prince, but I don't really remember The Cruel Prince because I read it like 2 years ago, and controversially I didn't like it. It wasn't for me. I don't know, it was all just very like underwhelming. It was not bad, like it just wasn't great. I think it wasn't a standout for me. I think I'm getting less and less standouts in fantasy, and I think this is just probably indicative of the fact that I should read less fantasy, which I do think I do. If you have seen what I was reading 2 years ago, 1 year ago versus this year, I think this is slightly overrated. I think I should probably stop trying to chase this fantasy romance high. If it's a completed duology, which I haven't looked into yet, I will read the second, but if it's incomplete, I'm not going to bother. I think some people will really love this book, and that's fine. I just didn't. The next book I read was a physical book, and it was Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. This is a lit fic book, and did I say it was a physical one? I have this copy. It's like very, very thin. A young woman moves to rural countryside to support her brother and be of help to him after his wife and children have left him. Soon after her arrival, and this is what drew me to it, there is a series of inexplicable events happening in the local village. We're talking bovine hysteria, the death of a ewe and her baby, a local dog has a phantom pregnancy, there's a potato blight. The locals' suspicion towards newcomers becomes increasingly more hostile and all of a sudden quite focused on her. So I can safely say this is a case of this book was not for me, unfortunately. It's a shame because the cover was gorgeous, the blurb sounded really interesting. It was, I don't like to use the term blind buy, but I like picked it up and just bought it because it just looked good. I thought it would be for me. I just really think I'm not the intended audience, so I don't think it was bad. I personally found it way too literary for me. It was a very challenging read. Could border on pretentious, potentially. I feel like I haven't made up my mind about that yet. There was so much allegory and metaphor and like other literary references in the book to other things that I couldn't quite follow. I found quite hard to read. I think that I personally didn't understand and that just went straight over my head. The text is very meandering and long-winded and goes off on tangents that go in so many different directions that I felt like it was really severely affecting the pacing for such a short book. It just became increasingly long-winded. There were snippets of this book that I really enjoyed, don't get me wrong, like small passages. I felt like overall the tone of the book and the setting were very, very atmospheric, and there was some amazingly delivered, impactful, like punchy one-liners and sentences that really just, I was like, wow. I think overall this is a book that is intended to be analysed from like a literary standpoint, and unfortunately I just won't be the one analysing it. Next up, a much anticipated read for me, and I think for everyone else wanting me to read this, because I had so many DMs about this. This was a physical book. I got this from the library and it was Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. Contemporary fiction ... horror question mark is literally what I've written down, because I've seen that has been classed as horror, and I do think there are some moments in it that are quite horrific, but I don't know if I would class it as a horror for me personally. I don't know. Irina is placed on a sabbatical from her bar job following an incident and is offered an exhibition space. So she's a photographer who scouts very ordinary looking men off the street and persuades them into allowing her to take explicit photos of them, and they kind of get much more explicit as it goes on. So when she offers this exhibition space in London, it is a chance for her to revive her career. That was not a great synopsis, as this is a very hard book for me to synopsize, if that's a word. I still don't know after all this time if it's a word. My first Eliza Clark book, so I had pretty high hopes of this after seeing so much hype for the last like year and a half. So I do think my high expectations for this book were met. I'm a real sucker for an unlikable female protagonist and also a very repulsive book. Like, I like disgusting books. This is a hard review for me because I read this so long ago at the time of filming this, but I liked the sense of this increasing dissatisfaction with everything that was going on around Irina. This feeling that Irina was completely separate from her actions and the rest of the world. It felt very much like she was in this bubble where she didn't feel like she was doing anything wrong, or if she did, she didn't care. She becomes like increasingly more disassociated with everything. There is so much to say about this book, there's so many themes, I guess, like the themes of gender, the themes of like power dynamics and abuse, the themes of violence and everything like in between all of that. Like, it's so interlinked, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But I don't really feel that I like have the smarts or the thoughts to put this together in like a really critical way of what the author was trying to do. That being said, I'm sure there are like hundreds and hundreds of amazingly well written reviews about all of those themes and about how Eliza Clark like puts it all together. I just don't have the sense to put anything together other than the fact that I really liked it. Yeah, I really enjoyed reading this. I felt ultimately very gripped, which is what I look for in a book. Prior to actually like reviewing or reading any books online and like making it public knowledge, I went through like a very intense phase of reading like only disgusting and disturbing books, or books like this and much worse. And I kind of like did the max I could, because it's obviously just like quite harrowing reading a lot of like disturbing content, and that was kind of my thing. So it was like quite nice to revisit a little touch of that, you know. It's not a 5-star read for me, I don't think, but it's definitely up there with one of the better books that I've read this year, or one of the books that I've enjoyed most reading. And I will probably include this when I do kind of my favourite books of the year. I don't think I'll be rereading it, but yeah, I just think for its impact, I feel like this book is appropriately hyped. In the same vein, I can see why people wouldn't like it, because I think it's quite an intense book. I kind of loved her annoying best friend and her Tumblr posts as well. Like, I quite loved that. I liked that little element and insight. It was really interesting to me. That was like a nice, almost I guess a bit of like comic relief from the depravity of it all. I think it's a great debut, if not a little bit obnoxious, but I feel like that's kind of the point. Another audiobook for me. I really smashed out the audiobooks this month. I find it hard to choose, but it was How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. Contemporary fiction / crime, question mark. Grace discovers that her absent millionaire father has rejected her dying mother's pleas for help, yikes, and sets out to revenge her dead mother. How she sets out to do this is by killing everyone in his family. So as a reader, we bear witness to this, and eventually she's locked up, but for a crime she didn't commit, for a murder she didn't commit. So I audiobooked this, and let me tell you, I'm so glad I audiobooked this. I did it on Spotify. I just had to use up some of my hours, and do you know, I have a little bit of like a toxic trait in that I don't like to reach for books that are really, really, really popular. It's a rude thing that I do, and it's unnecessary, but I'm so wary of like the books that you see splashed across all of like the front of the bookstores and things like that. I never have really, I don't want to say like trusted it. Me and Doug always laugh that we're like a little bit anti what's super, super popular. And don't get me wrong, like I'm such a girl's girl. There's just some things with like books and TV, the second someone recommends it to me, I'm like, no, I'm okay. The more someone talks to me about something, the less I want to read or watch it. That's why I never watched Squid Games. Everyone was going on about Squid Games. I just couldn't watch it. But anyway, I was proven wrong. I know that that's like a really ugly trait of me to have. It's just everyone has their flaws, right? So essentially I was pleasantly surprised. I actually enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. The narrator was so good for this. I know I say this for like every audiobook I read, but I do think a narrator really makes or breaks an audiobook. She was so conversational. I felt like she had this disdainful, like holier than thou tone that Grace was really projecting throughout the book. I just think she did it really, really well. Generally, I think the book was a little bit too long overall. I would say I felt like it maybe peaked earlier than I thought it was going to. There were definitely some aspects of the book that like took me out of listening a bit. There were some social observations that felt maybe a little bit judgy. I mean, the person is a murderer, you know, like Grace is a murderer. She's never going to be like a great person. She killed people. But it's this kind of like social observations that felt like they went on slightly too long. And I think ultimately it was supposed to be like a commentary on class, but she ended up sounding quite like classist herself. Some of the observations about like modern day life and like the very millennial quips, like I am a millennial, but she was almost like playing up this like millennial commentary. Most of it landed, but some of them I did like roll my eyes at a bit. I was just like, okay, whatever. I mean, she's obviously like a sociopath or psychopath. I don't really know what the difference is, but like that's the point of it, I guess. But some of her ranting and raving was just so boring at some points. Like she was a bit self-obsessed, but you would have to be to kill like that many people, right? So I felt like I was really rooting for her for so long of the book, and then by the end of it I was like, whatever, I kind of hate you, you're so insufferable. I know I've just sat there and said I love the book and then like slagged it off, but those were like the kind of things that were like a little bit jarring to me. But I won't spoil the ending. But yeah, I felt like the ending was a bit like a bit eye roll. It's not what I really wanted. I don't know what I really wanted, but that's when I felt like the book became slightly too long. This for me is like a very, very clear example of a book that I don't think is particularly well written, but I still really enjoyed nonetheless. And I can see why it's so popular, and I completely agree with some of the reasons it's so popular. It's just a good formula. I think at first glance it's good and I really enjoyed it, and if you don't look too closely at it, you'll be okay. I think if you're someone that is really critiquing writing and stuff when you're reading, you might find a lot wrong with this book, but I think if you're just reading to read it, you might enjoy it. Next up was another physical book. This is one I borrowed from the library, and it is My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine, and this is, I guess, a fantasy romance, but not like the typical book that you might think of fantasy romance. It's a romance, but one of the main characters is a vampire. So Cassie Greenberg is a struggling artist that lives in Chicago that's facing eviction, and when she comes across a kind of like too good to be true room rental rate on Craigslist, she takes it. She knows something must be wrong with it because it's in a beautiful neighborhood, and she feels like it's got to be fake. Her new roommate is a bit weird. He sleeps all day, he talks straight like he's out of ye olden times, and he is devastatingly handsome, like straight out of a period drama. Firstly, yeah, one thing that really bugged me about this is just like the blatant overlook of one's safety. How many women do you know that would literally risk their lives staying in an apartment that they saw that was advertised on Craigslist that is like triple the price, well, triple under what it should be, and they do that overstaying with their best friend and his husband? They know that there must be something wrong with that apartment, but they are completely willing to risk the potential worst case scenario, overstaying with her best friend and his husband. That was a little bit mad to me. Like, make it make sense. I don't know, that was the first thing that I was like, okay, whatever. Like, you would literally rather risk your life. But who am I to judge? I say, clearly judging. It's a book, it's fine. So to cover the tropes quickly, we have age gap romance. I feel like when there's any kind of like fantasy male involved, it's always going to be an age gap romance because he's literally like hundreds of years old, but it's not particularly played upon. Forced proximity, obviously, because they're roommates, and then this kind of like roommates to friends to lovers trope. There's probably more than that, but I forget. Those are the main ones that struck out to me. I think I wanted a little escapism, and maybe that this just like wasn't the book for me. Maybe I'm not the intended audience. I felt like I probably should have known that from the cover, but the cover's kind of what attracted me to it because it's colourful. I felt like it was quite a nice colour. It was giving like rom-com. I think at the end of it, it was a little bit too fluffy for me, and I think it was a little bit like too rom-com-y. I think if I was going for this type of romance, which I sometimes do and I have done previously, it's best for me to stay away from like the extra added supernatural element. Like, just go for the human on human. Call me vanilla, but I'll just go for the human on human, please. It's very light-hearted. Cassie has to teach Frederick, who's like her vampire roommate, like the basics of human life. He's just woken up from a 200-year-old slumber, you know. He doesn't know how to use Instagram, he doesn't know how to send a text, he doesn't know how much rent costs, and that's like fairly entertaining and light-hearted, and like I can see the appeal of that. The man's just woken from a 200-year-old slumber, he's not going to know anything. But that being said, like despite the book being slow burn, like I do think it was slow burn. There's only one like sex scene in it, that's fine, that doesn't bother me. But despite that and like the level of kind of like smut and slow burn, the infatuation felt like very instant, and I don't really like this kind of like instant love thing. The problem I have with instant infatuation is that usually following the instant infatuation, sorry, I can't speak now, their relationship just like doesn't develop. Like, this is the problem I have with a lot of romance books. They like make this, oh my god, I've just instantly fallen in love with you, but let's not kind of like further this anyway. Like, it just doesn't progress. It just like barely moved me in the last chunk of the book, and I found the last bit like a pretty hard read. Like, I had to slog through it. It was just underwhelming. And a pet peeve of mine, I know this is not going to be a pet peeve for everyone, is when books do pop culture references. It feels too try hard is such a horrible way to say it, but it just really takes me out of the reading. So like there was TikTok references, there was Instagram references, there was like loads of Taylor Swift references. I don't mind like the odd thing, but when he's like, oh well, what is this TikTok you speak of, it's just like it just feels more like a comment. I don't know, like it just doesn't do it for me. I don't love it. I think it can be like well done if it's like fairly subtle, because you obviously can't really write a book about someone learning about modern times without the inclusion of some of that stuff, but it just didn't hit for me. So my last book was a physical book. It was a library book, and it was Death Valley by Melissa Broder, and it's literary fiction. Literary fiction. So this is a hard synopsis, but I guess you could say a woman arrives at a Best Western in California. She is fleeing like a lot of turmoil in her life. Her father is in ICU, like on his deathbed. Her husband is very unwell and his illness is worsening, and she just needs a little bit of escapism. The receptionist recommends for her to go on a hike in the desert, and she stumbles across this massive cactus with a big gash in the side, big enough for her to climb in. So she climbs in it. She goes on a journey. So this is such a tough review for me because I loved The Pisces by Melissa Broder. I can't remember what month I reviewed this in last year, but my lovely friend Jade lent it to me. I've subsequently lent it to someone else and I want it back because I loved it. This is my second Melissa Broder book. I have not read Milk Fed, and I think that will be my next one to read because everyone recommends that very, very highly. Anyway, this is not about her other books. This is about Death Valley. I've come to realize that she has such a unique and distinctive like writing style and writing voice. The themes she uses are like so transformational, like quite literally. They're about things turning into things and things not being as they seem, about literally like transfiguration and transformation, and there's always a journey involved. There's always a journey involved. Ultimately, I think this book was too symbolic for me. Like it was too, I guess like metaphor based. There was too much that I didn't feel like I was picking up. And I feel like this has been a theme of a lot of the books that I've reviewed this month. Maybe I was just reading the wrong kinds of books for my moods, but yeah, there was just so much going on. There were so many points where I was like, I don't know what's real and what's not. And I know that that's the beauty of like an unreliable narrator, but it was like living too much in the make-believe and the transformational and the transfigurational and like things not being as they seem, that it just went completely, I felt lost. I found it really hard to like visualize. My threshold for things are not as they seem was much lower than I thought when reading this. I think I was really ready for like her madness that she writes, but I didn't want the journey this time. I don't know, like I was reading this journey and I felt myself like not wanting the journey that she was giving me. I didn't feel rooted enough in reality when I was reading the book, but the main woman is not rooted in reality at all, quite clearly. There was some really good themes of like grief and like pre-grieving and self-discovery and like sex and relationships and love and like how that's affected by illness, and I think I just wasn't picking up what she was putting down. I needed more grounding. I think horny desert western cactus should be right up my street. Yeah, I guess I just felt dissatisfied. The second half of the book was like batshit crazy, but not in a way that I enjoyed it in The Pisces, in a way that felt unstructured and hard to follow. So yeah, pretty mixed bag this month. Some good, some bad, some not so great. I didn't actually tell you where I was up to with how many books I've read this year, so let me tell you, including July. So I've read 52 books this year. I've only read one book in August, and I'm recording this like quite late into August, but it's fine because I've been moving and stuff. I don't have Goodreads, but you can find me on Storygraph. I will put the link for that all in the description box, and I do post what I'm reading on my Instagram stories as well, for like updates if you want to see all of that live. If you've got any suggestions, please put them in the comments below, because a lot of you DM me and then I forget to add them to the list and I can't find them. So yeah, let me know what you thought of today's video. I'd love to see if we disagreed on any of that or if we agree. It's quite nice because when I put that I'm reading a book, a lot of you will recommend me books on Instagram or tell me your thoughts, and we're often quite aligned. I wanted to say thank you for 3,000 subscribers as well, because I love you all so much. I just can't believe we're here already. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you liked today's video, don't forget to subscribe if you like my channel. It really means the world to me. Or leave a little thumbs up or leave a comment, you know the drill. Thank you so much for watching.